The Christian Girl and Her Muslim Apostate Lover. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim apostate girl in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 69. A Muslim terrorist group in Canada. While the world is engaged in the clash of civilizations between the Western civilization and the Islamic culture of death, Dr. Ibtival became pregnant and hid her pregnancy from her Muslim apostate husband until she could hide it no more. She is 4 months pregnant when her husband Dr. Kamal found out about it. They are indescribably joyful moments for him when he came to know that he is going to be a father. He requested his beloved wife to take rest and stay at home and leave the affairs of the movement for him until she will deliver their firstborn baby. The Sudanese apostate wife Ibtival accepted the suggestion of her Muslim apostate husband Kamal and decided to use her free time in writing new books to further the noble cause of her liberation movement. The initial plan of Dr. Ibtival and Dr. Kamal is to keep their marriage hidden from the outside world except for the board of directors of the movement. Dr. Kamal suggested this idea for safety measures. After Israel's legal issue which led them to be imprisoned in Jerusalem and Toronto, their matrimonial relationship became public knowledge. Before their marriage, Dr. Kamal's movements were more flexible. After the entire world came to know that he married the founder of the Muslims' liberation movement, he too became on the hit list of the Islamic terrorists. He is considered a possible lead to his despicable Muslim apostate wife's hiding place. In the meantime, the 2 apostate lovers are not aware of the danger they are facing after they got released from prison in Canada. While the world was busy with the developments of the International Criminal Court's issue, some Muslim terrorists in Canada were planning their deadly attack on the 2 top leaders of the Muslims' liberation movement. A group of Muslim terrorists in Toronto waited patiently for the female founder of the anti-Islamic movement and her Sudanese apostate husband to be released from prison. The RCMP police in Toronto already knew about this terrorist group, but there was not enough evidence to prosecute them. Some members of that radical group were arrested before and released for lack of evidence. This is one serious drawback of the justice system in Canada and other secular Western countries that needs to be fixed. Muslims are using and abusing the freedom provided to them through secularism and atheism of the West. If a terrorist group in the West has a smart Muslim lawyer who knows how to manipulate the legal system, its members can move freely in society until they do something devastating which results in the death of many innocent non-Muslim people. Only the top leaders of that Muslim terrorist group know about the assassination plot of the female founder of the Muslims' liberation movement. Somehow, those terrorists came to know the place where the Sudanese apostate man Dr. Kamal used to live before his marriage to their sworn female enemy, the so-called despicable Muslim apostate woman Ibtival. Moreover, the terrorists of Toronto were able to penetrate the Muslims' liberation movement. One of them pretended to be a Muslim who converted from Islam to Christianity. This pretender is a top leader in the Muslim community and imam of the biggest mosque in Toronto City. Therefore, his conversion is something unusual and hence drew the attention of the directors of the Muslims' liberation movement. Kamal was informed about this converted Muslim imam, and he passed the information to his wife Ibtival. Being thrilled about his conversion, Dr. Kamal decided to meet this apostate man and try to persuade him to join their movement. In the beginning, Dr. Ibtival was against the idea of her husband and tried to convince him not to meet such a person. She did not doubt the genuineness of the imam's conversion, but she was scared that the Muslim terrorists might use him as a means to reach her. She reminded her husband of the deadly mistake the twin Lebanese sisters made, which led to their brutal assassination by their own Muslim father. Despite the warning, the husband Dr. Kamal refused to listen to the wise advice of his wife Dr. Ibtihal and walked into the trap that the Muslim terrorist group in Toronto set for him. Their ultimate goal was to use him to reach the controversial female author who authored anti-Islamic books and founded a movement for liberating Muslims from their beautiful religion of peace, Islam. Dr. Kamal phoned the apostatized imam, introduced himself to him, and expressed his willingness to meet him somewhere. He gave him the address of his old apartment and asked him to come alone and meet him there. He decided to invite the apostatized Muslim religious leader to join the working team of the Muslims' liberation movement. He was thinking such an ex-imam could be a great asset to the liberation movement, and through him, they might convince many Muslims to forsake their terrorist and misogynistic religion and join the Muslims' liberation movement. For Kamal and Ibtihal, the Muslim apostate imam would be like Paul, who left Judaism and became Christian, or Omar ibn al-Khattab, who forsake paganism and joined Islam. Chapter 70. The phony imam in the biggest mosque in Toronto. The Sudanese apostate man Dr. Kamal met the Pakistani apostate imam who claimed to have become a Christian in his old apartment and had a brief talk with him about his apostasy out of Islam and conversion to Christianity. Somehow, through the brief discussion, he doubted the genuineness of the imam's apostasy. He noticed that the imam is having poor knowledge of the gospel of Jesus. The Muslim apostate imam refused to confess that Jesus is the Son of God and that God can come in the flesh as a human. Then Dr. Kamal tried to convince him that as a Christian he must believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ and the incarnation of the Son of God. When the Muslim imam refused to confess Jesus as Lord, the Sudanese apostate man began to doubt his conversion. Even so, to clear his doubt, Dr. Kamal decided to test the so-called apostate Pakistani imam to verify his suspicion. Being an ex-Muslim, Dr. Kamal knows that Muslims can commit any sin or blasphemy except cursing or insulting the Prophet Muhammad. The Muslim can curse his God Allah, doubt the veracity of the Islamic religion, burn his holy Quran, or tears its pages and pee on them, kill any one of his family members for the sake of Islam, and denounce the entire Muslim community. But he can never ever curse his Prophet Muhammad. All those sins are pardonable in Islam except the sin of insulting the Messenger of Allah or doubting his prophethood. Islam teaches that Allah can defend himself because he is alive, but the Prophet Muhammad cannot defend himself because he is dead and gone long time ago. Therefore, the sin against the Prophet of Islam is unpardonable, and the Muslim who utters such a blasphemy, his repentance cannot be accepted. Such a Muslim apostate who insulted the Master of Creation must be killed, even if he is found holding to the sacred curtains of the holy Black Kaaba in Mecca city. Therefore, if a Muslim curses or insults his infallible Prophet Muhammad, the Sharia commanded he must be killed, even if he is found holding to the sacred black coverings of the holy house of Allah. For that reason, the Muslim cannot sin against his prophet because the sin against the Prophet Muhammad is unpardonable in all four schools of the Sharia. No Muslim man or a Muslima woman can curse the Prophet Muhammad and still remains Muslim and alive. In addition, the second reason which prevents Muslims to sin against their prophet is that they unknowingly worship the Prophet Muhammad and place him in a position higher than their God Allah. Every Muslim must pray to his Prophet Muhammad whenever he mentions his name or hears his name being spoken by others. Even Allah must pray to Muhammad and bless him. No Muslim can have the audacity to ask himself who is supposed to pray to the other, whether Muhammad should pray to his Allah or God must pray to Muhammad. In other words, the creature should pray to his creator, or the creator prays to his creature. Then the highly educated Sudanese man told the Muslim apostate imam that the Prophet Muhammad cursed the Jews and Christians and called them infidels and descendants of apes and pigs, and encouraged his followers to curse and kill them. Therefore, he requested him to curse the Prophet of Islam. The imam avoided the request of Dr. Kamal and made some excuses. Then Dr. Kamal changed his request and told the imam to say, Muhammad is a false prophet and therefore his religious message was from Satan. The imam won't say that too. When the Imam refused to curse the Prophet Muhammad or denounce the message of Islam, Dr. Kamal became convinced 100% that the phony man is still Muslim and lying about his apostasy from Islam and conversion to Christianity. Therefore, he confronted him with his shameful lies. Immediately, the Sudanese apostate man perceived the trouble he put himself into. But it was too late when Dr. Kamal understood that he had fallen into a dangerous trap. In the meantime, his beloved Muslim apostate wife Dr. Ibtihal waited the whole night for him to call her or return home. When she lost her patience, she dialed his cell phone. She became so worried when she discovered that his phone was switched off. She waited for some time and dialed the same number. Still, the cell phone continued to be switched off. Her worries turned into panic and terror when her Muslim apostate husband had neither called nor returned home, and his cell phone continued to be unreachable. At first, Dr. Ibtihal wanted to go and find out what had happened to her beloved husband. However, she hesitated to go because her husband told her she should not follow him and wait until she hears from him. Finally, the extremely panicked and exceedingly troubled wife approached the police authority and reported the matter. It was still early in the morning when she lodged her complaint. Shortly after her complaint, the police went and searched for the missing husband in his old apartment. The police of Toronto could not find any trace to indicate that some strangers had visited the apartment. However, from the neighbors the police came to know that some men came to the building and left shortly after their arrival. The neighbors identified the visitors as immigrant Muslims from their clothes and long beards. Consequently, the police authority concluded that the missing husband most probably fell victim into the hands of some Muslim terrorists. As a matter of fact, the Sudanese apostate man had been truly kidnapped by the Islamic terrorist group and tortured to the point of death. As soon as the Pakistani imam of the biggest mosque in Toronto City refused to speak blasphemy against the alleged prophet of God Muhammad, Dr. Kamal confronted him about his deception. At that moment, the phony converted apostate imam pulled out a revolver, pointed it at the head of Dr. Kamal, and forced him to surrender. Then the phony apostatized Muslim leader called some of the Islamic terrorists who were waiting for him outside the building. Shortly after that, 4 Muslim terrorists entered the apartment and searched it. The terrorists thought the despicable Muslim apostate man Dr. Kamal and his evil apostatized Sudanese wife Dr. Ibtihal are living in the same apartment. When their search revealed that the apartment is used as an office for the anti-Islamic movement and not a place of residence, they kidnapped Dr. Kamal and took him somewhere out of the city. Then they began to torture their captive to extract some information from him. The Islamic terrorists wanted to know where their sworn enemy, the ex-Muslim woman who sold herself to Satan and became his deadly tool against Islam, is hiding from them. Dr. Kamal resisted all their tortures and refused to reveal the place of his wife. The terrorists kept him alive and continued to torture him. No matter how hard they tried, they could not succeed in extracting any information out of him to lead them to the residence of his wife. Meanwhile, the RCMP and the police of Toronto searched for him everywhere in the city. Many suspected Muslim mosques, houses, shops, and schools had been meticulously searched. Under the direction of the Canadian police, the controversial female author Dr. Ibtihal moved to a different apartment. The police expected that the Muslim kidnappers, through their cruel tortures, might extract from Dr. Kamal information about the whereabouts of his hiding wife. Shortly after the kidnap, the news leaked out and the media picked it up. In every major news agency in Canada and the USA, the kidnap of the second person in the Muslims' liberation movement was broadcasted as breaking news. Before Israel's issue and his kidnap, the name of the Sudanese apostate man Dr. Kamal Ahmed was hardly known to the outside world. In fact, very few people associated with the Muslims' liberation movement are known to the world. It is the policy of Dr. Ibtihal that outsiders should not know the whereabouts of any one of her employees for their safety. She is the only one who is known to the outside world. Chapter 71. The Islamic Terrorist Cell in Hamilton City. In the meantime, Muslims became extremely happy about the kidnap of the Sudanese apostate man, who is the husband of the despicable founder of the Muslims' liberation movement. The so-called blasphemous Muslim apostate woman who convinced the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands to condemn their holy Quran and the sacred hadiths of the infallible prophet of God Muhammad. This was considered a great victory for Muslims and had been openly celebrated by them on the streets, along with their women and children in the Middle East and other Islamic countries. Many imams of mosques all over the world and other religious leaders in the Middle East urged the Muslim terrorists in Canada to kill the wicked husband of the cursed Sudanese woman and not to keep him alive for a single hour. They wanted her Muslim apostate husband Kamal to be beheaded as her former infidel Christian lover Samir was slaughtered by the lions of jihad in Chad. They prayed to Allah to grant them another victory by killing the accursed Sudanese woman that Satan is using to reproach the blessed name of the infallible prophet of God Muhammad, who has been sent by Allah as a mercy to mankind and derided and ridiculed. Their beautiful Islam, which is the religion of peace. At any rate, after 3 days of intensive search, the RCMP agents have been able to get a lead to direct them to the place where the terrorists are holding Dr. Kamal captive. Someone used the captive husband's cell phone and dialed the cell phone of his hated Muslim apostate wife, who has done a lot of damage to the glorious name of their beautiful religion of peace. Through her provocative writings and controversial speeches and her anti-Islamic movement, she succeeded in convincing the ICC and millions of people all over the world to believe that Islam is the religion of terror and produces every year thousands of Muslim terrorists. The cell phone number of Dr. Ibtihal had been already stored in the cell phone of her Muslim apostate lover Dr. Kamal. The RCMP police are tapping and monitoring her cell phone without her knowledge. Therefore, the Canadian police were able to hear the conversation between her and the person who called her. Then the anonymous caller asked her to come and meet him in a certain place in Hamilton City. Before asking her to come to meet her captive husband, the Muslim man informed the controversial author that the jihadist lions and lionesses are holding her Sudanese apostate lover in that city. He threatened her that they would assassinate her husband if she failed to come within 24 hours. The caller told her further that if she informs the police or delays her coming, her Muslim apostate husband would be slaughtered and his butchered body would be thrown in Lake Ontario. The Canadian terrorists know about the previous kidnap of her former infidel lover, the late Dr. Samir Peter Dang, and how those Muslim kidnappers were able to blackmail her and forced her to accept all their conditions. Accordingly, they know for saving the life of her former infidel lover, the cursed Sudanese apostate woman agreed to apologize to Muslims on the Al Jazeera satellite TV for hurting their religious sentiments. She also reconverted back to Islam and agreed to return to Sudan to face the death penalty for her abominable blasphemy which she spoke against the master of creation, the infallible prophet of God Muhammad. Taking into consideration all those former steps she did, they anticipated that for rescuing the life of her new Sudanese kidnapped apostatized husband Dr. Kamal, who is in their hands and under their mercy, the despicable Muslim apostate wife Dr. Ibtihal would comply with their demands too. But they wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Because she and her husband are apostates from Islam, the Muslim terrorists in Canada decided to behead them both and burn their filthy dead corpses. They know that the Sharia stated that an apostate from Islam should be killed, and his dead body shouldn't be buried, but to be burned into ashes just like a carcass of a dead animal. Being a former Muslim woman, Dr. Ibtihal knows the mentality of the Islamic terrorist more than the Western police understand it. Therefore, she decided to meet those Muslim terrorists no matter what they're going to do to her and her captive husband. She determined to die with her lover Dr. Kamal rather than leave him alone to be murdered by those Canadian terrorists. She based her decision on the former bitter experience that she went through when the jihadist terrorists in Chad beheaded her Christian lover, Dr. Samir, and posted their evil slaughter on the internet. She long time ago understood that those Muslim terrorists are demon-possessed. They are also psychopathic people who don't feel remorse for inflicting pain on their helpless victims. They enjoy the torture of their captives as the Prophet Muhammad did with the 8 captive men whom he cut their hands and feet and blinded their eyes with heated nails. Then he let them die of thirst and heat in the city of Medina. No rational and moral human being who was created in the image and likeness of the loving God could do to his helpless victims as the Prophet Muhammad did unless he was under the control of Satan. Therefore, the beloved wife Ibtihal does not want to go through the same feeling of guilt for causing the brutal death of another innocent person. Her lover Dr. Kamal is not only her husband, but she is carrying his yet-to-be-born baby in her womb. Therefore, he is exceptional and means everything she is holding dear to her. He is sharing with her the great vision she has in life and is prepared to lay down his life for that noble cause. Many times, he endangered his life for the noble cause of the Muslims' liberation movement. Even his present crisis was caused by his zeal and love for the Muslims' liberation movement. As soon as the phone conversation ended, Dr. Ibtihal entered her car and drove toward Hamilton City. She has no clue that some police officers of the RCMP are following her. The RCMP agents do not want to alarm the Muslim terrorists by informing Hamilton police to raid the place where Dr. Kamal is believed to be held by his captors. There is a high probability that the person who called the controversial author Dr. Ibtihal and told her to come over there he did so because the Muslim terrorists wanted her to come out of her hiding place. Then they would be able to assassinate her along with her captive husband. Therefore, those RCMP agents did not inform Dr. Ibtihal that they were following her until she reached the place where she is supposed to meet the man who phoned her. A few minutes before she emerged out of her vehicle, the resettled refugee Muslim apostate woman received a call on her cell phone from the RCMP. The caller informed her that there are 6 unmarked police vehicles surrounding the place where she is parking her car. He told her further to remain in her car and call the person who ordered her to come and ask him to come out and meet her. Dr. Ibtihal has become extremely astonished when she came to know that the RCMP agents had followed her without her knowledge. Despite her amazement, she obeyed the instruction of the Canadian police and dialed the number of her husband's cell phone. The same Muslim man responded to her call. She told him to come out and meet her. The man at first insisted that she should come out of her car and meet him at the address he gave her. Dr. Ibtihal told him that she is parking her car a few meters away from his apartment. She even gave him a description of her vehicle and the plate number of her small car. Then the man told her that someone would come soon to meet her in her car. The RCMP agents heard the second conversation between the wife of the kidnapped husband and the terrorist man. The Canadian police watched carefully until they saw a young immigrant woman come out of the building and walk toward the car of the controversial author. They suspected that the young woman might have a loaded gun and has come to shoot and kill the controversial Sudanese female author. Therefore, they decided not to risk the life of Dr. Ibtihal. When the young woman reached her car, 2 RCMP agents in civilian dresses approached her from the rear and ordered her to surrender. Without resistance, the young woman surrendered herself. When they searched her hijab and abaya, they did not find any weapon in her Islamic clothes. The immigrant girl pretended to be innocent. She said to the RCMP agents that she was passing by and out of curiosity, she decided to look into the beautiful parking car. The Canadian police agents did not accept her excuses because her movements from the beginning exposed her intention. Then the RCMP agents immediately entered the building and raided the apartment where the controversial female author Dr. Ibtihal had been asked to come to meet the man who claimed to know where the Muslim terrorists are keeping her husband. A Muslim family owns the apartment. The family consists of 3 daughters, 2 sons, and their father and mother. All the members of the family are inside the apartment except the young woman who had been apprehended near the small car of Dr. Ibtihal. Then the RCMP agents identified the father as the man who phoned the Sudanese female author on the phone. After that, they thoroughly searched the entire apartment, but could not find the captive man Dr. Kamal. Despite that, a little pressure on the man and his family revealed the hiding place of the kidnapped husband of the controversial female author who is hated by every Muslim in the world. Chapter 72. The Woman Who Turned the World Upside Down. Shortly after the arrest of the Pakistani family, the RCMP police officers surprised the Muslim terrorists in another apartment in the same city and rescued the captive Sudanese man. The RCMP agents have rescued Dr. Kamal in the nick of time. The Muslim terrorists had kept their kidnapped victim without food and water and starved him for 3 days. During those days, they used every means of torture they knew to get information about his hiding wife. Despite the unbearable torture, with a brave heart, Dr. Kamal withstood all the brutal beatings and determined to die rather than reveal the secret place of his hiding Muslim apostate wife. Therefore, he was dying and could die at any moment when the Canadian police raided the apartment and rescued him. The Muslim terrorists starved and tortured him day and night to the point of nearly killing him. Immediately, Dr. Kamal has been rushed to the hospital and kept in the intensive care unit. Every doctor who has seen the dying condition of the rescued kidnapped man concluded that he may not last for more than a few hours. The hospital gave him less than 24 hours to live. When his badly battered body did not respond to any treatment, the hospital declared him clinically dead. Notwithstanding, Dr. Ibtihal has vowed to the Lord that she would not drink water or eat food until her dead husband comes back to life. She told God either to kill her and kill the baby in her womb or save them all, father, mother, and child. The loving and dedicated wife remained the whole night praying and crying to God. She did not drink any liquid or eaten any food since the time the Canadian police found her husband's body lying dead in the den of the Muslim terrorists in Hamilton City. After 24 hours, the hospital doctors reported that the terribly tortured man has come out of his lifeless state, but still he remained in critical condition. However, the doctors refused to give any false hope to his wife Ibtihal. Some doctors warned her that if she continued to fast, she might endanger the life of the child in her womb. Therefore, they advised her to break her fast. Despite the warning, the pregnant wife Dr. Ibtihal refused to listen to the doctors and renewed her vow to God. After another 12 hours, the doctors broke the good news to the self-afflicted wife that her husband is responding to his treatment and has come out of the critical condition. Dr. Ibtihal waited for more than 12 hours until her husband has been transferred out of the ICU. When her dear husband Kamal opened his eyes and became aware of the world around him, his loving wife Ibtihal took the first sip of water after 48 hours of continuous fasting. As a matter of fact, Dr. Kamal survived the brutality of the Islamic terrorists through divine intervention. The doctors and nurses who attended his treatment admitted that his survival and recovery are nothing short of a miracle. Dr. Kamal stayed for a couple of weeks in the hospital before he has been discharged. As soon as her beloved husband has been discharged from the hospital, his loving wife convinced him to move with her to another city. Without informing anyone, the controversial female author Dr. Ibtihal and her Muslim apostate husband Dr. Kamal left Toronto City and secretly moved to a city in Western Canada called Victoria, which is the capital city of the province of British Columbia. The couple refused to reveal the place of their new residence even to the board of the directors of the Muslims Liberation Movement and the police of Toronto, Victoria, or Vancouver. They know there are Muslim policemen and policewomen who are originally immigrants from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Somalia, the Middle East, and other Muslim countries. For that reason, they expected those Muslim police officers might either kill them or sell them to another terrorist group in Canada or the USA. A few months later, Dr. Ibtihal delivered a baby girl and named her Ikhlas, which means loyalty. She chose that precious name because her husband remained loyal to her to the point of being tortured to death, but he didn't betray her or reveal her hiding place to the demon-possessed Muslim terrorists of Toronto. Dr. Kamal accepted the prized name of their firstborn daughter, Ikhlas, in honor of his beloved wife too, because she vowed to fast till death until the Lord granted him another life. In the meantime, the Islamic emergency meeting in Cairo City has created a crisis in the third world countries in Asia and Africa. Although the leaders of Muslim and Arab countries refused to implement all the decisions and recommendations of the meeting except the political and economic sanctions, still, their subjects took the law into their hands and began to persecute their fellow citizens, the Christians who became the scapegoats. In each major city, pogrom erupted immediately after the meeting was over. Muslims attacked the homes of Christians, killed the men, strangled the children and babies to death, raped the women and small underage girls, and destroyed and looted the wealth and properties of their helpless victims. Some outraged Muslims opened the stomachs of pregnant Christian women, removed their babies, and dashed their heads to the walls. When the police stepped in, many innocent Christians were already being brutally raped and killed. Some of the so-called infidel Christian women got seriously wounded, and many Christian girls were gang-raped. The governments of those Muslim countries were forced to use military soldiers to control the brutal attacks of the mobs of angry Muslims on the hapless Christians. The United Nations in Geneva advised Christians in those Muslim countries to leave their homes, churches, and places of business and seek shelter in the nearby police stations or military bases. Many Christians ran from their houses and hid in their churches. They expected the Muslims wouldn't attack them in their places of worship. But sadly, Muslims considered those churches worse than the taverns of liquor and brothels of prostitutes. Consequently, Christians were brutally murdered, and their women and girls had been gang-raped inside their churches. Many priests and pastors got slaughtered on the pulpits. Some of the Muslim policemen and soldiers also took advantage of the situation and raped Christian girls. In some African and Arab countries, the situation went beyond control. In Nigeria, a civil war between Christians and Muslims started immediately after the Cairo meeting was over. Some of the Coptic Christians who escaped the brutal pogroms in Egypt had been sheltered in emergency refugee camps that were created 24 hours from the time the meeting was ended. In Sudan, thousands of southern Christians living in Khartoum city got brutally murdered and their women were gang-raped. Lebanon became divided into two warring states of Muslims and Christians. In Tanzania, Muslims and Christians engaged in a bloody war that the government could not control. Many other African countries witnessed group slaughter of innocent Christians, and their women had been subjected to cruel gang rape that resulted in the death of most of them. Many Arab Christians were killed in Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Gaza Strip, and West Bank, and their females got raped too. Meanwhile, non-Muslims in Western countries are watching on their televisions the news in the Third World with horror. There is pressing demand from top officials in the UN who are seeking to persuade military intervention from Western countries in those Muslim countries where the situation is deteriorating every hour and every day. The brutalities of Muslims against innocent Christian children and women convince the non-Muslim world of the noble cause that the woman founder of the Muslims' liberation movement initiated. Many Western countries adopted the decision of the ICC against the Quran of Muslims and hadiths of their Prophet Muhammad. Even some Muslims condemned the cruelties of their fellow Muslims. Some Muslims living in the Western countries spoke openly against their faith and publicly declared that Islam is truly the religion of terror and terrorists. The decisions of the Muslim scholars and leaders in the Cairo emergency meeting that led to the violent reactions of Muslims in the Third World worked for the good of the Muslims' liberation movement. Firstly, many Westerners became convinced that Islam is not the religion of peace, but the religion of terror and produces terrorists. Secondly, many Muslim men and women for the first time came openly in the media, condemned their religion, and declared their allegiances to the Muslims' liberation movement. Thirdly, non-Muslim and non-Western countries such as China and South Korea adopted the decision of the ICC. The only secular government that still remained neutral is India. The United Nations organization helped millions of Christian refugees in Egypt, Sudan, Lebanon, and other Arab and Muslim countries to flee from their homelands and got resettled in some Western countries. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States of America welcomed many of the Christian refugees who fled the Islamic terrorist persecutions. After the Cairo Islamic emergency meeting, every Muslim male is turned into a terrorist and demon of death. The world gradually began to be divided into Muslim and non-Muslim countries. Some pessimistic critics have called Dr. Ibtihal the woman who turned the world upside down.